Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Council's Executive. I'm Stephen Conway. I'm the leader of the Council and Executive Member for Housing and Partnerships. And as you can see, I'm going to be chairing this meeting. Could you please ensure that any mobile devices are switched off? And if you are participating via Teams, when you're not speaking or being asked to speak, could you please mute your microphones? And please note that this meeting is currently being webcast live. I would like to introduce you, in case you don't know them, to the people sitting around the table and behind us. And I'm going to start with the officers first. We have our Chief Executive, Susan Parsonage. We have our Monitoring Officer, Andrew Moulton. We have our Chief Finance Officer, Graham Ebers. And from Democratic Services, we have Priya Patel and Callum Wernham. We also have over there from the Communications Department, it's Mel as opposed to Dave. Yeah. I wasn't fooled by the name, so don't worry. Okay, and I'm going to ask my colleagues around the table to introduce themselves and their areas of responsibility. I will perhaps start over on the left with David.
I'm David Hare. I'm Executive Member for Adult Services, Health and Wellbeing.
Good evening, Rachel Bishop-Firth, Executive Member for Equalities, Inclusion and Fighting Poverty.
Good evening, I'm Imogen Shepherd-Bay. I am the Executive Member for Finance and Governance. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Prue Bray. I'm the Deputy Leader and the Executive Member for Children's Services.
Good evening, I'm Lindsay Ferris. I'm the Executive Member for Planning and the Local Plan.
Good evening, I'm Ian Shenton, Executive Member, Environment, Sport and Leisure.
Good evening, I'm Paul Fishwick, Executive Member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways.
Thank you, everyone. We now move on to apologies, and I have received apologies for absence from Councillors Sarah Kerr and Clive Jones. Are there any other apologies for absence that we know of? I don't think so. That accounts for everyone. So the minutes of the previous meeting, this is item 22 on your agenda. I wasn't at the previous meeting, but I think I can still propose that we accept the minutes, but I won't be able to vote in favour of them. Would anybody like to second the proposal?
I chaired the meeting and I'm happy to second them as an accurate record.
Thank you. Would those who were present indicate whether they're happy or not to agree the minutes? Those in favour? That's, I think, amongst those who were present, unanimous. Thank you. We can then go on to item 23, declarations of interests. Are there any declarations to declare? I'm going to remind members that you need to specify the nature of the interest and also the agenda item to which this interest relates. And I need to start with myself. I need to declare an interest as Chairman and Non-Executive Director of Loddon Homes and the Holdco in connection with item 31 on the agenda. Are there any other declarations of interest? Prue?
Thank you, Stephen. I'm declaring an interest in the same item, item 31, as the Chair of Berrybrook Homes and a Director in the holding company.
Thank you. And David?
And I'm declaring interest in the same item, item 31, as the Chair at the moment, and also Non-Executive Director of Optalis.
Thank you.
I forgot I'm also the Chair of WHL.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for reminding us of that. Okay, if there are no other declarations of interest, I'll move on to item 24, which is a brief statement from me. Given that some doubt has been cast on the need to make savings, I should like to take this opportunity to remind everyone of the gravity of the situation we face. High inflation, combined with increasing demand for statutory provision, especially in children's services, is creating enormous pressure on the council's finances. It's made worse by the rise in interest rates, which has added to the cost of servicing our borrowing for capital projects. Wokingham, as I think many people are now aware, receives less core funding from government per head of population than any other unitary authority in England. The headline inflation figure nationally has fallen slightly in recent weeks, but the inflation in our costs continues to pose a significant challenge, and when combined with growth in demand for statutory services, requires us to find a staggering £11.8 million worth of efficiencies in income generation this year, more than anyone can remember before. I would welcome opposition councillors' constructive engagement with the savings process. Our residents expect all councillors to behave responsibly in the circumstances in which we find ourselves. If we receive no help from the opposition, we will not be deterred from doing our duty to protect the council's finances. We overcame significant financial challenges last year by making tough decisions in the public interest. We will continue to put the financial sustainability of the council, on which many people of the borough depend for vital services, as our top priority this year. Thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to item 25 on the agenda, and that's public questions. The first question that is in the agenda is from David Ireland. I have informally, I think, been told that David is withdrawing his question. He was going to be here in person, and as he's not here, and I don't see him online, I'm assuming that is indeed the case. So if there's any doubt as to whether David has withdrawn his question, I'm sure Ian will be able to provide a written response if that's necessary. But I think we must assume from his absence and the fact that it was reported that he was going to withdraw the question that he has indeed done so. But I'm sure you can provide Democratic Services with a written copy of your response, Ian, so that if it turns out David would like a response, you can convey it to him via Democratic Services.
It's already been provided.
Super. Thank you very much, Ian. Now, the next question is from Peter White, and he's asking a question of the Executive Member for Climate Emergency and Resident Services. Good evening, Peter. I hope you can hear me. Peter, unfortunately, Sarah, as you've probably heard, has given her apologies. So I'm afraid you're left with a rather poor substitute to answer your question, and that's me. But I'm quite happy to do my best. So would you like to ask your question, and I'll do my best to answer it?
Sure. So this is my family's decarbonisation plan. We have solar panels. They cost £9,000. They will generate about 5 megawatt hours of electricity per year. That's about a tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent, about the same as a medium-sized tree. A developer near me cut down 2 large trees to widen a drive, completely negating this saving. There is an environmental impact survey for 155 houses in 3 Mile Cross, probably approximately 15 kilotons of embodied carbon dioxide, mostly scope 3, so Woking Borough Council doesn't need to count that. It would take 15,000 years for my panels to net that out. I have an electric vehicle. It cost £18,000. I do about 6,000 miles a year, which is the equivalent of 3 tonnes of carbon dioxide. A development like Hall Farm, which may be 4,500 homes, might have 500,000 of embodied carbon dioxide. Years to going project for me. Infrared panels I could choose in excess of £6,000 for my house, or an air source heat pump between £15,000 and £20,000. These are large costs again for our family finances to bear. And I'm wondering, is it all worth it? Will it make a difference? Am I the only person who sees it this way? Does Wokingham Borough Council have a coherent, realistic strategy for explaining to residents why they should engage with the Climate Emergency Action Plan, considering the cost of even attempting to become carbon neutral, and the fact that development in Wokingham Borough wipes out any gains we might make individually?
Thanks very much for your question, Peter. And if I may start by commending you for your commitment to invest in these measures to minimise your own carbon footprint and that of your family. As you know, reducing our carbon footprint is an important thing for us all to try and do because it mitigates the effects of climate change. The recent weather conditions over the past few weeks in much of the world, I think, is evidence enough of the need to take action. Delivering sustainable communities is important to this agenda. While building new homes does have a carbon impact, those homes, especially affordable homes, are vitally important to meet local housing needs. It's important that those homes are delivered to the highest possible environmental standards and that they are well connected to jobs and services via public transport and safe walking and cycling routes. We do recognise that current building regulations fall short of what is needed to address the climate emergency. And the particular instance you mentioned, Peter, of the development at 3 Mile Cross was approved in 2016 when the current building regulations were, of course, in force and they were applied. And that was at that stage the limit of what could be asked of developers. We're now progressing in our review of the planning policies, the timetable for a new local plan, and it's set out in the agenda for this meeting. And our intention is to create a suite of new policies which reflect best practice in seeking to achieve zero carbon impact from regulated activities. You've highlighted the cost of some of the energy efficiency measures, most of which require an upfront investment, and you gave some examples. These measures do lead to significant savings in the longer term. And on this point, I want to mention a council-led scheme that's currently open for registrations. It's called Solar Together, which aims to facilitate residential installations of solar panels at a competitive price through vetted suppliers. Residents and organisations have a part to play in the borough's decarbonisation journey by shifting to more sustainable behaviours and minimising their carbon footprint. And I would encourage people to follow your example where they can. Thank you, Peter. Do you have a supplementary question you'd like to put?
I do. It's a little bit shorter. So the Climate Emergency Action Plan on page 5 contains what's basically a mission statement from the residents of the borough. I'm sure you've read it. It says, in a carbon neutral Wokingham Borough, our community would breathe clean air and enjoy clean and green biodiverse spaces. People would walk, wheel, scoot or cycle, use accessible public transport and low emission vehicles. Homes, businesses, places of work and leisure will be low carbon and energy efficient, powered by renewables, and use innovative technologies that pave the way forward for future generations. Wokingham will be an inclusive and diverse community where everyone plays their part in contributing to a low carbon future. Based on the Climate Emergency Action Plan, the expected new local plan, the issues of major house building with insufficient supporting infrastructure and the increasing population of Wokingham Borough, can the executive for Wokingham Borough Council give a score on a scale of 1 to 10 of how well you think we are doing in terms of succeeding in our carbon neutral mission for 2030? And can you please justify your answer?
Thank you, Peter. That's a very detailed and quite probing supplementary, and I think you'll understand why I'm going to have to defer to my executive colleague, Sarah Kerr, who is responsible for this area and has, I think, much of that detailed information she'll be able to give you. So if you will accept this, I think we're going to have to provide you with a written answer to your supplementary. Is that okay?
You don't think the executive could just even give a number, even if they don't just...
I think that would be very hazardous for to try and give a number without the guidance of the person who's overseeing work on this important area. So I think should give you a written answer, which I think will be much more carefully considered than we'd be able to be this evening. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you.
Right. I think that is the end of public question time, and now we move on to member question time. And the first question in member question time is from Gary Cowan, who's, I think, with us online. Good evening, Gary.
Oh, good evening, Stephen. Yeah, I'll ask the question standing in my name.
Can't actually see you, Gary.
Sorry?
I can't see you. Have you got your camera off?
No. Oh.
You may have a shutter over your lens or something. You're not visible.
Well, the camera is on.
But we can hear you, which is the main thing.
All right. Well, I'm not very nice to look at anyway.
I'm sure you shouldn't say that, Gary.
I've had my haircut today, so I do look a bit
well,
better.
That's another reason for us to be able to see you. But anyway, we'll have to put that pleasure aside. So
Fine.
Would you like to ask your question?
I'd ask the question standing in my name, but I must mention the date was the 13th of July, 1922. And the first paragraph has an error in it, and that is the council's legal representative president stated that the Town and Country Planning Act applied to Part 2 items only, which are challenged at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I know time flies, but I think you meant 2022. Okay, your question really comes in the last paragraph of your question. What precedes it, I think, is commentary leading up to the question. So let me try and answer your question directly. Last month, the executive agreed to the cessation and not the cancellation of the construction of a care home as part of the Towtley East Strategic Master Plan, as previously approved, whilst the viability of alternative delivery models for the care home are explored. Approximately £340,000 was spent on site surveys, feasibility and design work, and planning application preparation to secure outline planning consent for the whole of the Towtley East site. Following the granting of planning consent, approximately £800,000 has been spent on detailed design and pre-construction works. This spend is within the capital budget for the project as allocated within the council's medium-term financial plan. Costs expended to date can be transferred to schemes that come forward on this site and have all contributed to the increasing value of the overall site following the granting of planning consent. Do you have a supplementary question, Gary?
Well, yes. What I was going to suggest is my supplementary is probably a bit too long to make all the important points. So the only point I would like to make is, and I will send you an email that would solve that problem. I noticed the planning committee this month recommended a demolition of a house in the countryside to be replaced by a 68-acre care home, against contrary to policy CP11, and also that the council has purchased a care home on Barkham Ride. Has there been any information from the council on costs or business case for the one on Barkham Ride?
There has been, Gary, but I don't have those figures or that business case on me. So I think we will have to give you a written reply on that.
That's very welcome. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so we move on now to the next member's question, and that's from Pauline Jorgensen. Good evening, Pauline.
Good evening. It's a very quick question, actually. I'm sure that you know more than anybody else likes to apologise for things that have been done and gone wrong and then have to rework them. So I wonder if you could explain what you're doing to prevent the council changes to the key services, for example, caddy liners and bin service reduction, being implemented without following due process and proper approval.
Thanks for your question, Pauline. To answer it directly, an error was made in the progressing savings in the Place and Growth Directorate without due process being followed. That's now been rectified. Public consultation and the involvement of the Council's overview and scrutiny process will precede a decision being made. I have already apologised on behalf of the Council for the error. Mistakes happen, as any leader knows, in all organisations. Mistakes were made, dare I say, when your party ran the council, as I recall. None of us wants mistakes to occur, and we will do all we can to reduce the risk of them occurring again. And in this connection, we will be reviewing procedures and make sure constitutional requirements are better understood throughout the council. Do you have a supplementary, Pauline?
No, I don't. That was the assurance I was looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, if we can now move on then to the next question, which is from Peter Harper. Is Peter?
I'm online.
He's not here in person, but you're online, aren't you, Peter? Good evening, Peter.
Online.
Good to see you. Good to see you. I'm afraid, Peter, your question is directed at my colleague Sarah. And as you probably have noticed, and as I explained in response to Peter White earlier on, I'm afraid you're going to have to make do with a rather poor substitute in me. So if you'd like to ask your question, I'll do my best to answer it.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, my question is, in the 2022-23 medium-term financial plan, the Barkham Solar Farm capital cost is shown as £8 million. But in the Climate Emergency Progress Report from this for September 2023, it is shown as 26.8. I think I should say 22, 26.8, which is the correct figure.
Okay, thank you for that, Peter. The cost of the Barkham Solar Farm is currently forecast to be, and this is obviously not a single year spend, but the total cost is currently forecast to be around £26.8 million, which I think was the figure you just quoted.
Yeah.
That was reported to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee in October of last year. And that figure is based on the detailed design work undertaken to date following the granting of planning consent, with specialist input from industry consultants. It also includes the cost of connection to the grid. The figures published in the 2022-23 medium-term financial plan were the best estimates available at that time, when the project was at an early stage and before any detailed design work had been undertaken, and before the cost of the grid connection was known. Solar farms, as with any other infrastructure project, are subject to location, site-specific and capacity requirements. All these factors will affect the cost of the project and are only known once detailed feasibility assessments are completed. In its decision to approve the procurement business case for the build contractor for the solar farm in June 2022, Executive requested an updated business case reflecting the most recent costs and revenue forecast be reported back to the Executive for review once the contractor procurement process had been completed. Subject to resolving the current grid connection little difficulty, I expect this updated business case will be presented in due course. I hope that answers your question, Peter. Do you have a supplementary?
I do, and I suspect you're going to have to pass this on to Sarah. I've looked at the latest medium-term financial plan, and there's no mention of the solar farm at Barkham, no capital expenditure catered for. There is some carry forward from last year's budget, but it only accounts for £1.4 million. So at the moment, it doesn't look like there's any capital spend scheduled either this year or future years for phase 1 of the solar farm at Barkham, or let alone phase 2, which I believe is a similar £25 million cost. So where is the budget if it's not in the medium-term financial plan to deliver this solar farm?
You dropped away just at the end of your previous sentence. So I didn't quite catch that. Can you just say it again?
Yeah, so there doesn't appear to be any budget set aside in the latest medium-term financial plan for the solar farm. So how is it going to be funded?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm quite confident that my colleague Sarah would be able to give you a very good answer to this, but I will need to give you a written response.
That's fine. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we can then move on to the next question, and you'll be relieved to know that that's not a question of me. It's a question from Charles Margetts, and there you are, Charles. Good evening, Charles. How are you?
I'm well. And yourself?
I'm fine. I've had quite a few questions to answer, either my own or on behalf of others. So I'm quite relieved to be handing this one over to a colleague. And you've asked your question of David Hare. So would you like to put your question, and then I'm sure David will answer it.
Thank you. So good evening, David. In March 2022, when I was the portfolio holder for adult services, the council had a plan to close Suffolk Lodge and build a new care home at Toutley. I understand the council is buying the Four Seasons care home on Barkham Road, has been looking to purchase other homes. Now, obviously, this question was written before the comments tonight, basically, which I note, but to read the question, I also understand the council plans to proceed with a reduced scale Toutley home. Can you please advise the overall plan with acquisition of care homes? How many homes / beds are you looking to purchase or build? And what is the current plan future of Suffolk Lodge?
Thank you for your question, Charles. As I'm sure you know, all the information I can give you must be in the public domain. I expect you also know from your time as executive member that the number of older people who expect to require residential and nursing care provision funded by the council is projected to rise. This will probably be from from 284 residents in 2020 to about 499 residents by 2040. On the 29th of June 2023, the executive considered a report by the leader of the council and the executive member for business and economic development on the Toutley's development and the residential delivery model. This unfortunately identified that the current delivery model for the care home was no longer delivering good value for money to the council and its residents. The executive was therefore requested to agree to pause the delivery of the care home at Toutley East, while the alternative models of delivery for the care home are considered. This altered scheme, if it progresses, will still give an excellent dementia care home. As you know, Suffolk Lodge is a well-loved care home within the community, run by Uptallis, providing a good standard of care. There are no plans to change this whilst we explore the delivery method and delivery of a new care home. On the 14th of July, the administration was delighted to announce the acquisition of the Berkshire Care Home. Woking Borough Council has now exchanged contracts with Four Seasons Healthcare on the purchase of the home on Barkham Road. The information about this purchase is in the public domain. We are not, however, able to give further information until the purchase is completed due to our contractual obligation. Like Suffolk Lodge, this is a 50-bed care home that will be run by Uptallis. It is well loved by residents, even though it might not have the cutting-edge technology of a new home. To manage demand for local authority funded care, we're looking to increase our portfolio of care homes in the borough. We'll continue to work with the market to ensure sufficient, but our offer will include a mixture of new development and acquisitions. Thank you. Have you a supplementary?
Yes, please. Thank you for that response, David, which I note. Now, I understand, based on officer answer to an email, that this scheme was funded, or the acquisition of this care home was funded from the Property Portfolio Investment Group, which was set up, 3-4 years ago, which obviously borrows money and is meant to buy assets for commercial return. Now, I know, can you confirm if that's the case is the main question, please? And also, I note the response about a copy of a business plan, which I don't recall seeing myself. I may have missed it. Would it be possible you could send me a copy?
Obviously, I'll send you the business plan, but I haven't heard that. I'm getting nods of no from people, but certainly I haven't heard that, and I'm quite happy to send you a written response.
Yeah. Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to Shahid asking a question. Good evening, Shahid. And your question is for Ian, I think.
Good evening, and you'll be pleased to know, Stephen, that this question is not directed to you.
I am quite relieved. Yes, thank you.
My question is regard to Executive Member for Environment, Sport, Leisure, and the question is, there was a recent council press announcement that the number of rubbish bins in the borough will be reduced, and the remaining bins will be emptied less frequently. There are already reports of bins being covered with black bags and waste piling up around overflowing bins, a number of them in my ward as well. Inevitably, this will result in piling up of litter around the streets, footpaths, and children's play areas at risk, encouraging vermin. Who will be responsible for cleaning up this mess, and what extra costs will it occur?
Thank you, Shahid. The council is currently projecting significant financial pressure, both in this current year and in future years, and they must be addressed if we are to maintain statutory services in particular and support those most in need. The council's worked hard to find a way forward with its contractors and began to implement budget and service changes, which included taking over of some bins. But given the impact of those changes, it was recognised the council began that work without the appropriate approvals and the necessary supportive work in place. There were investigations and efforts by the council to remedy the situation, and a consultation will be held in due course that will consider frequency and prioritisations on street cleaning activities to address the issue raised in your question, and that will be whilst remaining within the funding available. A media release has been recently issued that provides more detail and context pending completion of the review, and we are working to minimise any additional costs and to complete the review as quickly as possible.
Do you have a supplementary, Shahid?
Yes, I do. Thank you for the response. I believe there was a list of bins which were to be taken out. When would that list be made public? And also, will we be sticking to that as a result of the review? Will we be sticking to that list, or will we generate a new one? And how would we do that if it's a new list?
I'm asking for the list to be part of the consultation. And that list will be subject to input from both ward councillors and from members of the public who can influence that. I'm not sure that the bins that were selected were the correct ones, and we want to make sure that those that will be going forward will be the correct ones.
Thank you, Shahid. And finally, I think we have a question from Graham Howe. Hello, Graham. It's good to see you, albeit online.
Good evening, Stephen, and thank you all for the opportunity for asking this question, which I'm asking of Prue in her portfolio of children's services. Hopefully we can get some clarity tonight. So the question is, the Bowhunt School expansion was unanimously agreed by full council in March 2022, including sixth form, SEND provision and extra year 7 places. Budget was £4.5 million. Following the Liberal Democrat Labour coalition last year, the costs were forecast at 6.5 million. The increase was partly in change of specification for the extra provisions and the material cost increases due to COVID. We then learnt that there were delays with contracts. Councillors Shenton and Cornish said, presumably informed by executive member, that the Bowhunt facilities would open in September 2022, but then published a public apology saying it was not going to happen. Wokingham paper stated that from Liberal Democratic sources that Bowhunt Trust was not going ahead with the project, but that was not the truth. The Bowhunt Trust were considering what extra contribution they could make to the project, not to abandon it. Now we learn that the costs are nearer 10.5 million, an extraordinary 2.5 times the original estimate. So, can Prue please put an end to this opaque changing story so that the residents of the Bowhunt community can be informed, but also the other Wokingham schools that will be impacted, and give a clear explanation of the provision, the costs and the timelines, if you would, Prue.
Thank you, Graham. And Prue will now answer your question.
Before I move on to the full answer, I would like to exonerate Ian Shenton for having said anything of the sort. I think you've referred to the wrong person there. In March 2022, the Council's executive approved the proposal to part fund a scheme to create a new sixth form and create additional year 7 places and enhance inclusion at the Bowhunt Wokingham School. At the time, the project was intended to provide a 300-place sixth form opening in the near future, with costs split between the Council, 3.7 million, and the Bowhunt Education Trust, or BET, 2 million. The cost was estimated by BET in its business case submitted to the Council. However, the original financial budget, as indicated in the BET business case for the sixth form accommodation, is significantly underestimated for delivering a new build expansion to the school. This follows more detailed design work and costings of the initially proposed scheme, taking into account the government school building standards and significant inflation costs. The current estimated cost of the proposed new build expansion is 10.5 million. Working with the Bowhunt Education Trust, officers are working on options available to bring sixth form education to Bowhunt, and a further report on the timescales and costs will be reported back to me in autumn. While the options are being explored, the school has informed the Department of Education that it has not been possible to secure the commencement of a sixth form offer from September 23 as originally proposed. The Council are working to provide information to assist the students affected by this to find alternative sixth form places available in the Wokingham area. Other schools in Wokingham, including Forest School, have sufficient available places to admit students from Bowhunt.
Thank you, Prue. Graham, do you have a supplementary?
Stephen, it wouldn't surprise you to know that I do. First of all, I apologise to Councillor Shenton. I have misquoted. It was another councillor that was making that social media statement with Councillor Cornish. Prue, I know that it's difficult. We know that it's difficult to get these sorts of projects through. There is a vast change here. Now, in the spirit of collaboration and getting things done for the community that Bowhunt would service, what is it that you need from your co-councillors to make this happen?
What an interesting question. I would suggest that there are councillors in the area around the school, perhaps not of my own political party, who might like to get their facts accurate when they're making statements on social media. And that would be of great assistance in getting this project sorted out. There is a report on the agenda this evening. I'm quite happy to have questions sent to me by any member if they want to know more information. We are expecting to bring another report back in the autumn, and we are working with the school. And I would rather people came and asked me about things rather than putting misleading statements on social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Prue. Thank you, Graham. And that brings to a close the members' questions. And we now move on to matters for consideration. And we're starting with on page 19 with the delivery of Wellington Road Affordable Housing Scheme. This falls in my area of responsibility insofar as I'm executive member for housing. And I'm delighted to introduce this report. The scheme will make a very welcome contribution to the Council's housing revenue account properties, catering particularly for two groups in need of affordable accommodation: care leavers and key workers. I'm sure all members of the executive, and I hope all councillors, will want to join me in thanking the housing officers who worked so hard to bring this scheme before us for approval. And I personally would like to recommend approval along the lines set out in your agenda on page 19. But before we move to a vote on that, is there anyone who would like to say anything? Rachel.
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to say a few words, both as one of the councillors for Embrook and also the lead member for Fighting Poverty. Really just to say this, I'm so pleased to see this small development going in. It's affordable housing, it's part of town with good transport links and therefore opportunities to travel to education and to work. And I'm particularly pleased to see the intention is that this will provide homes for key workers and for care leavers. The cost of housing in the borough pushes far too many people into a very precarious financial position, and this is going to help us to alleviate some of the pressures. This site is a small parcel of land. It's on the corner by Wokingham Station. It's currently unused. It can't really sensibly be used for recreation or another purpose. So to see this used for much needed homes is very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Those are really helpful sentiments. I think you're absolutely right. This is a very welcome scheme, not only, I think, for the people who will have the good fortune to be accommodated here, because it's a wonderfully well-placed development in terms of its access to services and public transport links. It's really very sustainable, but also it's of considerable help to the housing revenue account, because the housing revenue account, as I'm sure lots of you know, is a ring-fenced account, draws its income from the rents paid by residents in housing revenue account properties, and its outgoings are repairs and maintenance. And if the stock is aged, you have greater call on repairs and maintenance, but you still have a fixed income from the rent. So if you're adding new properties to the HRA, that clearly helps its financial situation. So this is a positive not just for the residents who will live there and will help reduce our housing demand, but it's also immensely helpful for the health and viability of the housing revenue account. So
Mr. Kirkbride, and I ought to say thank you very much for prioritising care leavers accommodation as part of this development. It's really very welcome.
Thank you, Prue. That was always, I think, in our minds, a really important thing for us to do. Thank you. So without any further ado, could we move to the recommendation on page 19, and can I ask for all those who are in support to raise their hands? That is unanimous. Thank you. We move on now to the next item on your agenda, which is capital monitoring 2023-24 quarter one, and it is on page 31 of your agenda. And I'm going to ask Imogen to introduce this item. Imogen.
Good evening. Yeah, this report notes our position at the end of quarter one from April to the end of June this year of our capital spending. We are being asked to note the position of the capital programme at the end of quarter one as shown in Appendix A. This also shows an additional cost of 600,000 for Winnersh Park and Ride, which is now 3.2 million overspent. And I will let Paul talk about this, but other savings have been identified in place of growth, which is compensating for some of the problems. We also have to approve a note the list of the list of carry forwards, which are projects that have been delayed and waiting for work to begin. We are also being asked to approve an extra 220,000 from the Berkshire Records Office. This is a joint project across the 6 local councils in Berkshire. This is a central storage location for public records for all of our councils in Berkshire. The initial spend was agreed at by the former council in July 2021. The costs have gone up considerably, and there are now new building standards that need to comply with this. So they were asking all of the local councils to fund their share, and it would be unavoidable for us not to contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Imogen. You mentioned Paul, so I imagine Paul would like to say something on this.
Yes, thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so on page 32 of the report, under place and growth, there is an item highlighted related to Winnersh Triangle Park and Ride. This project was stopped in the autumn of 2021 under the previous Conservative administration due to a Thames water main that affected the project. The scheme is now completed, but the delays to the project have meant that the contractors submitted compensation claims that are being worked through with officers to try and reduce these claimed costs. However, in addition, a provision of £600,000 has been included for the time being in case the Thames water main does require diverting.
Thank you very much, Paul. Is there any other comments? If there are none, I think we can move to vote on the 3 recommendations on page 31. All those in favour, please show. That again is unanimous. Thank you. And we now move on to page 39 in your agenda, Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2023-24, again, Q1, and again, Imogen.
Yep, this is my second of 3 this evening. So, the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report for 23-24, this is obviously again the first quarter again. While there is only 2 items of note in this report, it does highlight the serious situation that this council finds itself in. In this quarter, we can see that we have a significant challenge coming from the rising inflation, and our current potential revenue overspend is approximately 2.9 million this year. There is also a possibility of other problems, such as the annual staff pay awards, which has not yet been agreed, and inflation continues as it is, the problems will get worse. The red line on the graph of this report shows the effect that inflation is having on this council, which is adding an unprecedented shortfall of over 11 million in the year 22-23, progressing into this financial year. This is the reason why we are having to make significant changes to our services. It is simply in order to survive. It is why we are no longer able to fund the things that we used to be able to do, and we are also having to shelve many of the things that we'd really like to be doing for our residents. This is why we have had to raise car parking fees, reduce litter bins, and the non-statutory transport costs. It is certainly not something any of us want to be doing as councillors, but it is unprecedented inflation that is forcing us into this difficult situation which we have to manage. Councils are not allowed to go bankrupt, and central government has to step in if this is likely to happen. Councils such as Slough, Thurrock and Woking have already gone that way, and others such as Southampton, Guildford, Birmingham, Kent and Hastings, amongst others, are saying that they're in trouble and facing an unsustainable future. To go that route would mean our services would be cut to the absolute bare minimum, and there would be very few choices that councillors could make on behalf of our residents. Also, Slough has had to increase their council tax by almost 10% this year, adding horrific burdens on their taxpayers. I would rather we were able to choose and prioritise and protect our most vulnerable residents, putting them first, ensuring that we can support low-income families and take care of our children and the people with disabilities. However, if we cannot claw back from this current overspend, we'll fall below the recommended minimum level of reserves in our general fund, and we'll be facing similar problems as the council's mentioned. Chart in this report also shows how much our revenue support grant has decreased. This is the funding that most councils receive from central government, but as we know, Woking receives the absolute least from the national government out of all of the councils in the country. The blue line shows our council tax increases over 10 years, which is capped by central government and has been significantly below inflation since 2022. This means that the only place we can go to make up budget shortfalls is to make savings from within the council and increasing the fees that we charge. We are aware that many of our residents are feeling the pinch from inflation too, but I would like to be open with everyone and explain what is going on and why this council just cannot carry on as we were. In the end of this report, our Chief Financial Officer makes his statement clear, and I shall read it out. The council continues to face severe financial challenges over the coming years as a result of reduction to public sector funding and growth pressures in our statutory services. It is estimated that Wokingham Borough Council will be required to make budget reductions of approximately 20 million over the next 3 years, and all executive decisions should be made in this context. And I shall leave other people to ask and comment.
Are there any comments or points anyone wishes to make? Ian?
I'd like to speak on recommendation 2 when it's appropriate.
Would you like to speak now, Ian? Because we're going to take the recommendations together. So if you'd like to just make your comments now.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'll tell you honestly that I had debated whether I could vote for this because of the implicit service reductions contained within. I will do, however, because the alternative would mean cuts to statutory duties that we cannot begin to contemplate. Many residents have little grasp of the full extent of a council's statutory duties. I've tried to find a clear list with the intent of sharing it on social media, but there is nothing up to date. The best that I've been able to find is a 2011 attempt by the Department of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which resulted in 2 spreadsheets. Yes, they were still using spreadsheets then and they're still using them now, with a grand total of 1,340 entries. More have been added since 2011, and more will be added this year. But typically with this financially illiterate government, these statutory duties are handed down either underfunded or completely unfunded. Not all apply to Wokingham Borough Council, but being a unitary authority, most of them do. And the ever-increasing burden of statutory duties is absorbing an ever-increasing share of the council tax cake. Add to that this government's pernicious capping of council tax for 10 years, below or indeed nowadays well below inflation, undermining all councils' financial stability, and then their deliberate impoverishment of WBC and some similar councils that are supposed better off areas by stripping away our revenue support grant. So our spending power is dramatically below what it was 10 years ago, while our statutory duties are significantly greater, taking up a larger share of a cake that is shrinking in real terms. The net result is we are forced to cut in non-statutory areas. But you might ask why the previous administration did not react to this, but instead continued with such largesse as free, albeit unbudgeted, food caddy liners, for which we have never seen a business case, by the way. They even signed off long-term grounds maintenance and street cleansing contracts with built-in inflation-linked price escalators, even though they knew that their own government was intent on slashing the council's spending power. They did not call out this dishonest, corrupt and incompetent government because it is their party, the one to which they pay their subscriptions and donations, and then they pretend that they are somehow financially competent. I will vote for this tonight, but it's about time that our residents were told that the real cause of these cuts is the financial incompetence that is inherent in today's Conservative Party.
Thank you, Ian. I think Prue would like to say something.
Yes, I would, and I, in a way, follow that. But it's in that context that I'm making this statement. So Children's Services is contributing to most of the predicted overspend, but we are trying hard. We're battling away to see where we can prevent those costs escalating. And there are 2 aspects of it that I wanted to draw people's attention to. Home to school transport has nearly £1 million in upwards pressure. And to give you some context, the budget is 5.8 million. So that's a prediction of a 17% overspend. almost entirely due to general inflation, with a bit of it caused by having to overcome a shortage of drivers. People will know that we have recently had a consultation on our home to school transport policy. We expect to be making a decision on it next month, but that will not come into effect until September 2024. And in the meantime, we're trying to manage the situation. And you have to bear in mind that there are many statutory duties around home to school transport, exactly as Ian described. Now, I want to acknowledge this evening there are a group of parents in Shinfield who are not entitled to travel assistance, but need us to help them find a solution to getting their children to school at Embrook. Shinfield Parish Council very helpfully provided a forum last night at their meeting for the parents to discuss this with me, and we're now looking at potential options in a collaborative way with the Parish Council and the parents. But as I said to them last night, it has to be on the basis that Woking Borough Council will not be able to commit any additional funding, and the predicted overspend, I think, shows you why. The other thing I wanted to draw attention to is the worrying upward trend in the cost of placements for children with complex needs. We have fewer children who need such placements this year, but the average cost of such a placement has gone up by 88%. This means we are paying £5,000, well, £4,972 to be exact, every week more for 8 children than we were paying for 14 children last year. So if you take that over a year, that's about £250,000. We are in the same boat as many other local authorities, and it is simply not going to be sustainable if we can't get the cost of placements down. Most probably by reducing our dependence on what are essentially private profit-making businesses. And that's the point that applies to local authorities in general, not just Wokingham. We have seen outsourcing promoted as the way to be efficient and save money, and now we're reaping the consequences of that by not having any control over the costs and being at the mercy of people trying to make a profit out of vulnerable children. Not all of them. There are charities, there are local authority homes, and there are similar schemes, but not enough. And it is costing this council an awful lot of money to provide the sort of care that we need to provide for some of our children. And as you see, an 88% increase is really unsustainable.
Thank you, Prue. It's rather sobering figures. Okay, I don't think we need to prolong this discussion any longer. So can we move to the recommendation on page 39? Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That, I think, is everyone. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to page 55 in your agenda. And this is the shareholders' report. And again, this is to be presented by Imogen.
Yep, number 3. Here we go. This is a report that we introduced at the start of our administration. It's been done in the interest of transparency with the use of public money. We now require all of the companies owned by Woking Borough Council to report their financial performance to the Woking Borough Council Executive. And I think that's probably all I'm going to say. So if anyone else would like to share anything else in relation to this report, I think is where we need to go. Thank you.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak on this? I don't think so. So I think we can go straight to the vote on the recommendations on page 55. I think if those who declared an interest are still able to vote on this. I don't think it's not pecuniary. So all those in favour, please show. Thank you. That is carried. And we now move on to item 32 on the agenda on page 61. This is Bowhunt School Sixth Form update and budget. And this paper is presented by Prue.
Thank you, Stephen. So I wanted this report to go onto the agenda so that everyone could get some reassurance that we are continuing to work with the school to provide a sixth form at Bowhunt, because there has been quite a lot of misleading information floating about. People do need to understand that the opening of the sixth form is not in the council's hands. It's a decision that is made by the Bow Hunt Trust, not us. We have been working with them for over a year, but unfortunately we were not able to find a way to make the project work in time for the trust to wish to open the sixth form this September. But as I said to Graham Howe in answer to his question, we do have enough capacity for our existing sixth forms to provide places for everyone who cannot now attend Bow Hunt this year. We are proposing a twin track approach at the moment, looking at both new build and using an existing building, and the opportunity to use the existing building has only recently come up. These two options present different challenges. They have different advantages. Work will continue on both options for now, but in a couple of months, we will need to make the final decision on which one we're going to go with. And the Trust are fully aware of both options, and I expect to be bringing another report in October or November with that decision in it.
Thank you, Prue. That's really helpful to have that update. Are there any other comments anyone wishes to make? I think that's pretty straightforward. So could we go to the vote on the recommendations on page 61? Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That's everyone. And now we move on to item 33 on the agenda. This is the Local Development Scheme 2023, and the report we've got is from Lindsay.
Yes, good evening. I'm very pleased to be able to confirm the proposed timetable for our new local plan. This is shown in the table on pages 73 and 74 of this agenda. We shall be working over the next few months to be able to get to the next stage of the local plan. This is what's called the proposed submission of the plan for publication. This is scheduled for November later this year. This will be the stage of the process where residents will have the opportunity to comment during the period late 23 and into 2024. And I think that's the main points that I want to raise tonight.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just wanted to very briefly comment on this item to thank you for the work you've been doing to steer this forward. It's immensely complex sets of calculations that one needs to go into with the local plan. We're very lucky to have absolutely excellent officers who've worked on this process with us. But I do want to thank you for steering this forward. It's difficult work, and I do appreciate the efforts you've made. So if there are no other comments anyone wishes to make, I would suggest that we go to the recommendation, which, as you can see, is laid out on your agenda on page 65. Those in favour, please show. It's everyone. Thank you very much. And I believe that brings our meeting to a close. I don't think we have any other business to conduct. So thank you very much, councillors, for your contributions and for all of your efforts in all of your different portfolios. As we learnt at the beginning of the meeting, and it's graphically illustrated in the reports from Imogen, this is a challenging year for the council, so I really do want to express my appreciation for all the effort that you're all, as individual executive members, making to try and make sure that the council stays on track, fulfills all of its obligations to our community. So thank you very much. And that, I think, ladies and gentlemen, is that for this evening. So good night.